Welcome to another edition of the Giants Huddle podcast brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the New York Football Giants. I am John Schmeelk. Two very special guests this week. We have two of the masterminds between Hard Knocks offseason with the New York Football Giants. We have supervising producer Paul Camarata and senior producer Emily Leitner Cameron. Guys, thanks so much for doing this, and thank you for putting such great content out there for all of us to enjoy the last few weeks.
Thanks, John.
For having us. Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
All right, so let's start with this. Both of you have done Hard Knocks before. Emily, you're in fact right in the middle of doing the Bears one over the summer, right? So Emily, let's start with you, and then Paul, you can give your take. Biggest difference in doing this version of Hard Knocks, and you can get inside nerdy production stuff, I love it, versus what the Giants offseason was this year. What was the biggest challenge and differences for you guys trying to put it together?
We're a ton, and this is the first time we ever covered this part of the calendar with this part of a organization. So right off the bat, it was just different. Just being like, this is more of a front office show about the staff, less about the players. The players are obviously going to be a part of it, but that's definitely, quickly it was like, our main characters are, Joe Shane and his staff, and as well as, the coaching staff as well. So that was a big difference. I mean, I think also the timeline is a huge difference because we were, filming for 3-4 months and then putting it together to air 3 months later, which I think was a huge benefit to this show. Because, the amount of volume of potential scenarios that could happen of players they sign or draft it's almost infinite, it seems like, and they definitely exhaust all options. So it's kind of having the time to capture that and then develop the stories with where, who ended up being the 2024 Giants players was super helpful, whereas kind of in the in-season version and the training camp version, because it airs every weekend live, you are way more just kind of guessing on the fly for that. Whereas this one, we had the benefit of the Giants, one, working really closely with us, and also of time to kind of capture everything and then see how things develop.
How about you, Paul?
I don't know if I have much to add to that. No, I think Emily hit on it. It's a different story. There's football news and football business basically 12 months a year now. I think that the main difference was the depth with which we went into this sector of the calendar. We've done slices of it on different shows. We do a show called Hey Rookie to the NFL, Welcome to the NFL, where we follow a couple guys from end of college season through the draft. But again, to Emily's earlier point, that's a player-focused show. I think that's one of the biggest differences. We had someone, another producer gave me the feedback that they got a note from a friend. I really love watching this Giants show because I love football, but it's interesting to see the people who work in football who aren't players. I can't relate to guys hitting somebody on the field or working out at the combine, but I can relate to people working collaboratively in a conference room, traveling for their job to have to go back and get information. There's sort of this executive team at work, but it's almost a business show, some people have called it, which was a different version of the story for us to tell. And yeah, the turnaround again, obviously is huge. Like you're doing like any production, right? The real-time nature of something, a live broadcast versus a sort of a slow burn doc is going to give you different opportunities and challenges and puzzles to solve. So kind of taking those versions of things we do and braiding them in a new way towards this portion of the calendar and the story made for kind of the familiar surprise of a type of football doc.
And Emily, I got to imagine when you're doing the summer show, these stories tell themselves, right? A young kid has great practices. All right, well, we're going to start following him a little bit. You pick some players ahead of time, sure. But I got to imagine for this, you probably have different conversations about 200 draftable players that you've logged over 4 months. You have some idea based on the conversations who the Giants might pick, but you don't know. It could be any of 30, 40 players. So what's the process of cataloging all of that? So once you figure out who they actually pick, you can actually go back and find everything and put a cohesive story together.
Yeah, it's you nailed it. That was a huge undertaking. And I think like there is a certain amount of unknown in the training camp version too, but it's, 90 players. Whereas as you said, like this I mean, the numbers might have even been in the thousands when you do college and free agency combined.
Yeah,
And
good
then
point.
at the very start of and I mean, the other part of that is you're like, oh, like they'll have an idea, like they'll just talk about way less than 1,000 players, but no, their process was talking about kind of every single possibility out there, because that's kind of what it takes to kind of shop around to boil it down to what is the best decision for this year's team. So at the very beginning, we definitely, Paul and I talked with our team of producers and seasonal production assistants back here who have done a lot of really great work organizing and cataloging during the training camp and in-season shows. But this one, we kind of were like, all right, well, we have a completely new problem here. Like, we kind of have a set of codes and stuff for free agents and people that are in the league, but for colleges and protective college players, we kind of had to come up with a whole new system to, like you said, be able to catalog everything because any decision could lead anywhere. So they did a huge awesome job undertaking, kind of making up a whole new system and combing through all that footage pretty much live, to make sure that when they eventually traded for Brian Burns, we could go back and find all those conversations that we were alerted to. And, a lot of the people who were there directing also kind of noted that, like, hey, actually, I heard Joe Shane talk about this at the Senior Bowl. You should go back and find that. And sure enough, there it was, kind of nice and logged too. Like, so yeah, that part of the cataloging process was huge and kind of definitely uncharted territory for us.
Paul, what was the monitoring like? Is it 24/7? You guys have somebody watching video of these offices? Are you recording at all times? Do you actually have to physically hit record when somebody walks in a room? Like, oh, that could be interesting. How did that process work out in terms of making sure you captured everything you needed?
It's not 24/7. I mean, it's a lot. We have our equipment there at the ready so that when we choose, and we did it, we would do it in advance. Like, this is a week we're going to target based on, it was often based on what the sort of the work schedule that we knew who was going to be in the building. There were some weeks where, again, Emily mentioned Senior Bowl, that college all-star period of January, there was less activity. So one of our first objectives when we do these shows is always really just try to fact find, what's the story we're telling? Who are the characters? What is their work schedule? Just like you would in training camp. What days are they off? What days are they on? Same idea. We start with that as our sort of our North Star, and then we build our capture around, because we're still making a documentary where we don't know where, we need to know when the activities are happening. But to your point, we have to cast a wide net because you don't know when certain moments are going to happen. So we had the equipment at the ready. We had a crew that we would staff to go and actually be on site doing the recording when those days were prescribed and decided upon. And then it was really, like Emily said, there's a lot of work that goes on in that personnel department from the end of, the morning after the season ends to, up to on and through and past the draft. So we have to just pick our spots. Like, hey, this week, we know there's a really heavy week of scouting going on, a review in the building because they're about to go to combine. They're going to prep for that. That's going to be a heavy week for us. We kind of just try to follow the calendar and deploy our resources to where we could, try and fish where the fish are, so to speak.
Are you rolling
Yeah.
on every camera at all times, or do you actually have to physically hit record when you think something might happen?
So yeah, there is an operator that
Okay.
has control of both how the cameras move and what is recorded when. And Nick Rotondi was our main one. With Will Zoris, we're kind of our two. But yeah, there are people that need to be in there to operate the cameras, and they do an awesome job. But it is that someone has to press record. It's not like a security camera where it's just rolling all the time.
Got it. What was the process like of working with the Giants, Emily, to figure out what can go in, what can't? I'm sure you guys have learned over your years of doing Hard Knocks what you could even try to pitch and what you can't pitch, right? You're like, oh yeah, we have no shot. But what was that process like? What was it like in working with the Giants ownership front office in terms of what you could get into the show to tell the most compelling story you could without obviously putting things out there that could hurt the organization?
For sure. And I mean, I think from the beginning, the Giants were awesome to work with and very open about their process. And to us, kind of as Paul mentioned, just to give us a heads up on what is on the calendar of this front office. Like, because we don't know what we don't know. We've covered it from the player side, but we're not sure when they had the meeting. So it was a huge collaborative process, and it is with kind of every team you work with. But, the Giants were awesome in being like, okay, here's our heavy meetings. This is kind of when we do the hard draft prep. This is kind of when we do the free agent prep. Like, this week is going to be, 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. days, whereas this one, is lighter just because people are all over the place for pro days. So that is very collaborative. They were super open. And then, kind of on the back end, it is really more of an approval process than any type of kind of editorial control. And for the most part, we present the story and put it together how, best we think is true to what happened, and also the most entertaining. And the biggest part of the approval, I think, in all of these shows is just making sure there's no competitive disadvantage, because it is a ton of access. There are things that we're capturing that would probably give someone a leg up in the off season or in season in the games that I think we take super seriously wanting to be trusted and being careful about that, because we don't want anyone to be at a competitive disadvantage once the season starts because they were on the show and giving us access. So that part is again also super collaborative and back and forth, but it's a lot of just to make sure that we're not giving things away that that is extra tape for competitors.
And Emily, just to follow up, this is a
Mhm.
different type of information than you presented before too, right? So I'm sure it was new for you
Yes.
figuring out what they'd be okay with and what they weren't. Like as you went along, did fewer things get rejected? Was it a lot of things where you had to go back and recut and re-edit? What was that back and forth like?
I think to your point, yeah, we didn't really know what was as sensitive. Like, after doing the training camp and the in-season for a while, you kind of know, like, okay, like plays, like you don't want to give away someone's play diagram, because like that's obviously something that could be like scouted. So you kind of learn that. Whereas this one, I'm like, I don't know what's proprietary and kind of what we learned. So I think we learned a little bit better what what kind of is the stuff that is part of just the Giants process that would be a key in. But I think going back and forth with the Giants, they were great on being like, you know what, actually, like this is something that we'd like to kind of just keep in house, because that's part of our process of evaluation that we don't kind of want out there. So they were awesome with going back and forth and just identifying those things. And I think we started to learn a little better as we went what kind of is, okay, this is probably sensitive, or this part of the board probably gives something away, whereas this one is just kind of generic information.
You're ready for a change. Payday comes early with Citizens, so go to that retreat. New You moves to the country. Now you're raising goats and launching a lifestyle brand. Are you ready for all that life brings?
And Paul, I guess I'll follow up with that because I think she talked about figuring out what part of these evaluation processes they're right with people seeing. How did you determine how to truncate, which is hours of meetings and, probably the half an hour sometimes just on one player when they're going through it in the draft room, and figuring out how to curate that information into 2-3 minute buckets on individual players to get the point across of how detailed the evaluation process is? Because I'm sure the Giants want to show, look, we're just not doing 90 seconds on a guy and we're moving on, right? But also, you can't do 20 minutes on one guy. It's a TV show. So what was the process that you guys used to kind of make sure you could get it into a presentable length, but also show the detail of the process the team goes through on some of these guys?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think because you set out to do this really wide mouth of the funnel in a show like this, we want to gather as much as we can, because we know there's great intriguing material in there. But to your point, it's not like to use Emily's phrase, it's not a security camera. We're not just going to like flip on the monitor and let people just watch. That wouldn't make sense. It'd be boring. So it's really just comes down to the storytelling and the editing aspect of it, to find the touch to say, what's the point of this? But here's a meeting. Is this like, and some of it's just over the years of the reps of doing it, what's interesting to yourself. Do you want to hear more about this conversation? When does it get boring? It's really just having the touch to say, no, they're talking about a topic that I can't get enough of. And that's where the experience comes in. And some of the folks who worked on the show have been working on this Hard Knocks series since the beginning. They've seen, you would think, almost every type of football conversation that exists, but here on this production, they were saying, we've never heard this type of conversation before. We've never heard them debate this, you know? And so when we had those antenna fly up, we'd say, all right, well, that's the kind of conversation you lengthen, you let play. That's the kind of scene that we're all just like wrapped by when it comes by. And then other things are like, no, like we only need small doses. It's really not a great answer, but it's really just sort of the feel of knowing how interested and entertaining and informative is this particular chunk of content versus like, I get it, time to move on.
And now
Yeah,
two
I think
things.
too, like,
Go
I'm
ahead, Emma,
sorry,
I'm
just
sorry.
to jump in, but just
Yeah,
part of
please.
the time frame process of being able to kind of go back and through cuts.
Yeah.
Like I know some of, my like our early cuts for something, I'd like Paul would watch and be like, this is pretty confusing and dense. And you'd kind of have a little time like, all right, like let's refine it, let's boil it down to the parts that make the most sense. Because when they're all talking to each other, they're using their kind of language that they all understand. But kind of that process of going through a lot of different versions and having other people watch it to be like, okay, this makes sense if you don't know anything about this whole process.
Now I got to imagine you can just make a short yes or no answer to this one. I know big parts of evaluation that teams do are part of what they do analytically with their analytics staff and also what they do with their medical staff. Those are two things that I know were not featured in the show. So I would imagine those are two examples of things that teams will probably want to keep more private because that might reveal how they look at things, correct?
There's so much information in so many areas. I would say that my answer would be there's way, way, way more information than we would ever want to or care to use on the show in all areas. Like honestly, yeah. And to Emily's point, some of it's just it's proprietary. It's just it's not relevant to the story, but it is relevant to their process. So it's just a matter of weeding through it. I think the scene in show 3, and this throw some flowers to Emily because this was her brainchild. The poker scene, right? So that was.
I was going to ask you about that. I love it.
Yeah. I mean, it was a cinematic, entertaining solution to what is a very complicated, like, the cap and the franchise tag, all these things that we read about when we read and watch pro football, but like what they actually mattered for this story. But it's like opening up a textbook. It doesn't mean every little detail is something that everybody can digest. So we have to sort of find movie techniques to make it interesting. Because we wanted to pull back the curtain. That was part of the show. But, if you're bogging people down and boring them and they can't follow it, then you're not really meeting your goal. So it's finding that balance between what's the really interesting, compelling, clear, digestible information that's motivating the actions of the process and the characters, and then what's the best way to portray. And some of it, sometimes it's just as simple as hearing the conversation in the room. Other times you need, again, a more elevated conceptual poker scene technique to bring something to life.
Well, you're telling me HBO doesn't want 10 full minutes of math as content on their platform? No,
that's right.
Surprising. I want to ask you about that scene because how you played into that poker thing. And Brian Dable joked about this at the Giants 100 celebration, where he says one of his ways to stay off of camera was to play loud music and commercial music when he walked into some of these meetings. How much did he execute that? And I thought it was ingenious how you used this little music that he played to then turn it into a scene in the show. So tell us a little bit about that.
For sure. Well, I think whenever you get the chance to use Beyonce, you always say yes, and do whatever you can to make that happen. But no, I think playing music is something that happens naturally throughout every show, and it seems like I don't know. I know Dave's kind of said he used it as a defense mechanism, but I think they just listen to music while they're going through tape because like it's kind of or where they're kind of put it on the background in the meetings. We see that in training camp all the time too. And kind of they put it on, and when you find a moment where they put it on and like pump each other up and engage with it, that's like, ooh, that could be something too. And seeing that, but it was also the content of the conversation. They were kind of going through their punch list, and I was like, oh, they say like very clearly what their goals are for the day, and they also like they achieved like all of them. So that's kind of what struck me for it too. And my co-producers kind of on that show, Cortland Bragg, Michelle Navarrete, and Angela Torma helped me sift through that dense day. Kind of after I was like, I think this gives us enough framework to help the rest of the day make sense. And even then, it had to go through a lot of dense of like slim downs and make it simpler to understand, because it gets confusing with all the things kind of flying around in the day. But yeah, I always love when you can get a piece of music, and that doesn't necessarily exclude us from using it.
Right. And I got to imagine, like, you guys boiled that down to like a 3-minute conversation between Joe and Dave. I'm sure that was a multiple hour full day, or multiple days even, of back and forth, correct?
Yes, definitely. I mean, what
Yeah.
was nice is it was kind of the culmination of multiple days of back and forth, where they were like, all right, we've talked about this ad nauseum. We're boiling it down to the final plan, basically going into it. But yes, it was a result of so many, many, many conversations throughout, months.
Paul, did you have to get permission from like Elliot Wolf and Saquon Barkley's agent and Saquon for using some of those phone calls for people on the other end? And did you notice when like Joe's talking to guys at the Combine or Senior Bowl that other teams, knowing that he's mic'd up, maybe they might be a little hesitant to kind of talk to him? What was that process like?
We definitely got, and everything was case by case in terms of who we went to and when and what point in the process. And some of it's almost like, again, we go out and shoot games on Sunday. We capture so much more than ever makes air. So it sort of evolves as the production goes on. Again, we don't know what conversations are even going to be relevant to put into a first edit until those things start taking shape. And then it just comes down to, as NFL films and the storytellers of the league, we have existing relationships. We also have sort of the global responsibility to always, not put something out there that's going to burn anybody. Like, that's not what we're about. And so we take that as our starting point, but then there's certain times where it's an innocuous sort of, it could be just like two people chatting on the phone, and versus other ones where it's like, all right, this is one we want to make sure everyone's comfortable with it and approves the usage before we go out. So it was a case by case process with, other than the people that were in the building every day, when there were phone calls and things like that, we kind of manage them each individually.
Yeah, absolutely. I got to imagine when you first captured the Dan Morgan, Joe Shane on the sideline of the Senior Bowl with kind of like the just joking Brian Burns throwaway line. I mean, at that point, it wasn't even on anyone's radar that trade could happen. And that's one of those things, if you're not logging it properly, that can just get lost to history, right? And you would never even had it.
No, 100%. Yeah, it's really, in this type of production, to Emily's point about where you have the longer timeline, that's the great advantage you don't want to lose. Like, you have the ability to not just do a bunch of shooting, but like the shooting's only as good as you're like knowing what you have, right? So logging it, evaluating it, again, collaborating on the team, and just always every week we would meet, and people who were logging and starting to edit would sort of update each other. So there was a growing institutional knowledge of what the conversations were within the characters' worlds. And then that helped us be really aware of what was happening, finding clues to something else, asking a good question when we went into an interview environment and we wanted to follow up on something. Yeah, it's really a matter of like, I mean, filmmaking is really, as I've never played in the NFL, but it's as much a team sport as football, I think, at least in terms of how we rely on each other. And we really can't achieve the final product without everybody really being in good lockstep.
Did you have any storylines, Emily, that you had to either leave on the cutting room floor because of time constraints, or just storylines that you thought maybe back in April, like April 10th, you're like, oh, this is going to be a huge storyline, and then it just never materialized, that you're like, oh, I have so much good stuff and now I can't use it?
I mean, I feel like there's a bit of option-based paralysis, because there are so many ways you can
Right.
kind of take this story. But I do think, again, kind of going back to the benefit of time and seeing that was able to kind of streamline our process of what stories to focus on and what guys to focus on. But like, whereas, in the other versions of the show, you are kind of like, well, this is the most entertaining to me, and I don't know how it's going to end up, so let's go with that type deal. Whereas I do feel like there was a benefit of, again, kind of building the most entertaining content kind of to you, and then letting the way it played out kind of dictate if you need to go back and change that or change things around for the most part. But no, I think honestly, like, there isn't much that jumps to mind in terms of cutting room floor, because I think we were able to kind of be really focused once we kind of got down to the nitty-gritty editing and get into it. And it was really kind of just refining and making things clear and kind of not superfluous to the story.
Paul, what was the thought process in terms of including some of the spring workouts, OTAs, mini camp. We did a lot of stuff with Daniel, but some of the other veteran players on the team, and including more of like the on-field spring practice stuff, where the show kind of ended at the draft. You did a little montage at the end where you showed some of the spring stuff. What was the thoughts of including some of the veteran off-season workout stuff and spring practices as opposed to most of the front office decision-making content?
I think it was just as simple as, we were focused on the front office. We were focused on Joe and company in terms of the daily work and the grind and the mission they have in a real day-to-day basis. But at the end of the day, and so to Emily's earlier point, like versus a training camp show where you are much more focused on the players, right? We knew we weren't going to be focused on the players, but the players, we didn't want them to be invisible. They're still part of the universe. They're still, again, we're capturing the work in the building. The players are still coming through the building. You mentioned Daniel. Obviously, Joe is very transparent from the beginning. What the decisions around Daniel were going to be figured out over the course of the spring. His rehab was a part of that. So that was a story that certainly percolated to the surface where we wanted to be able to bring that to life for the viewers. Again, Brian Burns, there was sort of a natural inclination once that continued to gain steam, like, all right, it's a big deal that they're going to trade for him. We're going to make that a big moment. And then over the course of what the timeline was of the series and what the story sort of beginning in was, at some point he's going to show up in New York. We want to see what that, we want to see that. We want to see him working out. We want to see him starting to mix. Not that he wasn't necessarily a focal point. We didn't interview him, but that was the unfolding of the season. And, those are the humans behind all these cards on the board. So we definitely didn't want the players to disappear. That's what I think that's what the work of the front office is really about. Players, we didn't necessarily follow them, but that doesn't mean they weren't part of the universe.
I want to ask this question to both of you because I'm sure both of you had some expectations of what this process was going to look like and what capturing it was going to be like. So for both of you, and Emily, we'll start with you, just impressions of how the Giants front office operates from a completely neutral coming in perspective. And maybe how was the process of how teams do this in the offseason different than maybe how you thought it was going to go?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with, I think what struck me the most about the Giants process in particular was even like kind of like from the beginning, like Joe, Shane, and Brandon Brown were super open about how it's not just one voice that makes these decisions or has input. And they were really kind of a proponent of taking a look at all angles of a situation. And if wanted to make sure that if someone on their team thought differently or they wanted to hear kind of all perspectives, like that was a hugely important part of making these decisions, is they want a staff that speaks up and has a different opinion on these guys. Cause it's not a monolith. Everyone doesn't think the same. And at the same time, like, there's a lot of different factors that go into evaluating these players, that some pan out and some don't. So I think the fact that, I want to say they felt the differing of opinions and kind of different angles coming at a table was important, really spoke to, I think resonated with me when capturing it, that yeah, it's important to see that it's not just like, okay, we all like Malik Neighbors. Yes, that's what we chose. It's let's look at all these guys and see why, what rises to the top is why Malik Neighbors was the best choice for us at number 6. So I think kind of the transparency and openness of that process, and kind of, raising different opinions, not just agreeing with the GM, because that's what he says, was super important and eye-opening for the Giants. And I think, it does seem that that's an important part, around the league to making these decisions in the front office, is that like, there are so many different ways you can go and so many different factors, that, it's easy to say like, oh, like on the draft pundit, like, yeah, this guy's a sure thing, he's going to pan out, but no, you don't know. That's why you have to do the work. So the amount of work that goes into that, I think it seems like that's common across kind of all the front offices. And that's kind of what has to be done to kind of make an informed decision.
How about you, Paul?
I think my impressions of the Giants were, I mean, honestly, just they're incredibly organized. They were incredibly collaborative. I'm going to, again, echo some of the things Emily said. I thought they have they all spoke like with such authentic belief in the work that they were doing for each other, right? They really gave each other credit, and in this really real way that they were trying to help each other out, always to get to the ultimate goal. They really just felt like the all on the same page. Hannah Burnett and Jeremy Bright talked about that. Mike DeReese, some of the scouts, they talked about the pride they took in their job, but also fitting into the larger mission, and especially in the viewpoint of the scouts, a lot of their work is out on the road for a lot of the year. And then this happens to be the part of the year where they're together. So we're kind of seeing those dynamics play out. And so I think there was an energy about that I thought was really interesting and fun to watch. And again, it kind of inspiring to the point of like how we all do our jobs with our teammates. They just always had a plan for everything. And then the best football teams to be around at every level, I would say, are the ones that like you can ask them on July 31st, what are you guys doing on May 2nd next year at 2 p.m., right? And like they know, like their calendars, and they're so well calibrated around, obviously during the season, it's the micro of that is during the week. We're playing Sunday at 1, everything's got to be ready for that, and we back into that kickoff time. But I really felt like the Giants were like that with their spring. Like they had all their schedules and all their calendars and who was going where and just a million moving parts, but they always knew what was happening. It made our jobs and our lives easier in terms of trying to deduce as best we could where the story was going to be. But again, I think as storytellers, it was interesting to see that part of the business of pro football, but again, it could have been the business of anything. And those were sort of my takeaways. I mean, I was just astonished. And I think the reason I ended up at all the places I just described is because I started out in the first weeks, really probably literally the first week, just being amazed how many people were spending how many hours on how much information and how much gaming out of situations and how much work they'd already done, to the point, like I said, the scouts in the fall just to prepare themselves for January. And I was just like blown away. Like, how could they even begin to wrap their minds around it? But then we watched for 4 months and we just saw it was just how they approached their work was the answer. So that was a really insightful thing to see unfold. And then of course it culminates in these peaks like the day of free agency, like the first round of the draft. And those are the things people pay attention to and get the headlines. But boy, there's a lot behind the curtain that's going on to make those things come to fruition. So those were kind of my takeaways of observing it all.
You love turf. You're good at it. So you start a turf biz. Business grows, your savings grow. Become the most celebrated name in turf. Are you ready for all that life brings?
Football season is coming, and so is the next college semester. If you need funding, a Citizens student loan could help you pay for 100% of your school certified costs. Get your rate quote in about 2 minutes at citizensbank.com/pay-for-college. One more specific question about the show. Then I'm going to throw some fan theories at you guys, and then I'm going to ask you about what's coming in the summer and the fall. I thought the way you guys kind of let the scouts show who they are throughout the program was interesting. And I was blown away by you guys showing some of the Joe Schoen conversations with them after the year.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine that was probably something where you're like, I wonder if they're going to want us to show that or not. So how did that decision process go in terms of how you kind of close the show out, showing Joe Schoen, just trying to teach and do the job any good leader would do with their employees in any job, and trying to make them better at what they do with the individual scouts, Emily?
So yeah, I think kind of when we saw that too, and I think we asked Joe about it too. I think one of the first things he's always said is that he was very proud of the fact that he kind of came up in all those positions, and that's like he knows what every one of those people are going through. He's been there, and he knows that however he can help them get to the next level is kind of something he wants to do, because that's how people helped him in his career, which was really cool. But I also think the other cool part about that kind of resonated with us is you see these guys evaluating players constantly. It was kind of cool to see them evaluate themselves in the same vein. And I think I don't think there was a super hesitation about kind of like showing that, because I think that's part of the process that we thought like that the Giants were pretty upfront that that's part of what we do. We're hard on evaluating ourselves. We believe in our process and the work that we do. So showing it is a good thing. But I think that's kind of what resonated about that too, is like that they put themselves under the microscope as much as they put these players they're evaluating too, which again, is kind of another part of a process that just makes everything better. And, taking the time to kind of take a second and go through like, how did we do in our jobs this off season only makes the whole team better. So that was kind of a cool thought of that. And something that I think struck was like, oh, like they're evaluating each other as hard as they're evaluating all of these players you just saw picked.
All right, then, Paul, I'll just give you a comment and then you can kind of respond to it if you like. The next to last episode is they're sitting there and Joe Shane's talking to Elliot Wolf. I was tense. Like, I'm sitting there like, all right, like this is like the real deal now. Like they're deciding, well, how much would we be willing to trade for this guy? All right, well, if he's not there, then what do we do? And going through those scenarios, I mean, look, we all like, mess around with fantasy football, right? And we think about, oh, do I want to do this fantasy football trade? This is like real life, like ending, beginning careers, singular decisions, especially when it comes to a quarterback, right? What you're going to do. Do you guys feel that the same way you got the viewers to feel it as you're viewing and listening and putting these conversations together?
I mean, I can only answer for myself, but when I first was, and I'm going to go the Wayback Machine, when I first worked in Hard Knocks for the first time, the producers who passed the baton to me for the role that I was going to take on said, look, you're going to see a lot of footage. That's basically, and you're going to see a lot of scenes that are cut, even cut scenes, forget the raw footage. You're going to be, my job at the time was to take all these scenes and maybe it was make it up 60 to 90 minutes of scenes that other people had cut and help guide the process of cutting it down to 45 to 60 minutes. So it's like, how do you even do that? Forget about all the raw. And they said, look, don't overthink it. There's going to be times where whatever your gut reaction is to something you're watching is, respond to that. Yeah. If it makes you laugh the first time, if it makes you tense the first time, if it makes you, have a question and lean in, like that's valuable. Cause like, that's what you want other people to do. So you have to sort of try and hone that skill as best you can. You can't do it for the whole world, but how do we gauge it for the audience? So that you had that reaction, first of all, is awesome to hear for us. But I think we kind of have a version, or I have a similar version of that. It's like, if I'm getting tense or I'm getting nervous, or even if it's just, there was an old shot where Tom Coughlin, you may have seen it, is throwing a water bottle into a trash can and he kept missing and he kept going back and grabbing it and throwing it again till he made it. And it's like, I learned more about that guy in that 15 seconds and I was fascinated watching it happen. That's kind of how all this is. Like, if I'm watching Joe Shane on the phone and I'm tense or I'm laughing or he's talking to his kids and their conversation's funny, like that probably like rises up the chart of things that maybe ought to consider putting in the show. So some of it's just as simple as, responding to your own instinct as a viewer and, as a storyteller to say, if I don't think this is interesting, other people probably won't, and vice versa.
All right, I'm going to throw some fan theories at you guys now before we do a little preview of what you guys have coming in the summer and fall. You guys can
make them extra crazy. We want just the craziest thing
off the reservation.
I got plenty of crazy for you. Okay, this is a very basic one, and I guess I'll go every other question for the two of you. Emily, we'll start with you.
Sure.
Have you ever or would ever stage a scene to help tell your story better?
No. It's all, oh my gosh. I mean, sometimes you wish you could because it would make our jobs a lot easier on how to cover it. But mostly the plan is how to cover it and let things unfold.
Paul, would you ever, if the team that you're covering, not just the Giants, any Hard Knocks team, told you to edit something deceptively so it told the story that wasn't true, how would you guys react to that?
That would not be a conversation that we would engage in.
No, I wouldn't think so. Ownership. This is an interesting one. John Mara's my boss. John Mara is one of your 32 bosses. He's much like he's all of our bosses, right? What was it like filming and dealing with him? And there is a segment of Giant fans that believe that he basically tells Joe Shane what to do. Joe Shane disagrees, and you edited around that to make it seem like Joe Shane was actually making the decisions, but John Mara ultimately just told him what to do. So I'll just leave that out there for you to comment.
We're really good editors. I don't know if we're that good, but I think that's what struck us about those was like, oh, you're like, he's not telling him what to do. He's letting him do his job. And he's kind of engaged and staying on there. But, at the end of the day, it's Joe's decision. And I don't think we can edit that another way.
So was that the sense with how Mr. Mara dealt with the front office, where it was keep me informed, I'll give you my opinion, but ultimately I'm empowering you, Paul, or John was empowering Joe Shane to ultimately make the decision?
Yeah, I mean, I think he said those words like that came out of his mouth several times during the show. Like, I have to trust my conviction, and my conviction is in the convictions that you guys have to make the decisions that you're going to make. And look, I thought there was something really refreshing. You already said he's all of our bosses, so I don't. It sounds how it sounds, but here was a leader in the organization who was super present, but not like he never felt like more than he just wanted to be informed about what was going on, and certainly weigh in with the experience that he had over the years. He told Brandon Brown that great story about reflecting on the Eli draft. Also, if you remember, that story ended with ownership at that time leaning into what Ernie Accorsi's viewpoint was in that situation. So there was sort of this continuity there. No, I thought seeing the inner workings, and to Emily's point about the transparency, just his willingness to be on the show. I don't know that every boss would want to be on that show in that situation, but we thought it was just another incredible, cool layer. And by the way, not for nothing else, but like the fact that the Giants 100th season and the history of the organization, and an organization with so much history, that's part of like what's in the walls there, and what motivates the work that they do every day. It would almost be negligent as storytellers if we didn't incorporate some aspect that the Maras and Tishes are involved, and that they're, trying to uphold the standard of everything that came before them. I mean, that was what made people talk about Hard Knocks and like, who's the team? I think once we know teams, like there's 32 of them, but they all have 30. There are aspects of the same, but there's also 32 different aspects in each organization, in each building, and this was one with the culture and the history of the team that we wanted to lean into. Mr. Mara, like, kind of was the embodiment of that throughout the series. And I thought it was we loved having that, or I'll speak for myself. I loved having him be part of the story, because I think it made it more real at the end of the day.
All right, one more question for each of you. We got 2 minutes. Emily, I'll let you preview what's coming up with Bears Hard Knocks, premiering next Tuesday, if I'm not mistaken. You have to get back to start editing that. I imagine putting episode 1 together. You've been capturing now for probably, 10 days or so, maybe 2 weeks.
Something like
even?
that, yep.
So tell us what's in store. Give us a nice little tease of it's excitement. Caleb Williams, Roma Dunze. It's a lot of fun stuff going down there in Chicago.
Yeah, I think super exciting is another franchise that's steeped in a lot of history, much like the Giants, that we've never kind of gotten to see behind the curtain here. They have a number 1 pick, and 2 first-round picks, and a lot of exciting receivers and defensive players, as well as kind of finding those guys on the bubble that might be long shots, but might make the Chicago Bears in the long run. So there's going to be a lot of exciting stuff there.
And then, Paul, how about fall? If for the first time you're doing a whole division for in-season, what is that going to be like? Or do you not know yet what that's going to be like?
Yeah, so I think it's going to be your second question first. It may be somewhat like the show we just finished with the Giants, in terms of we're going to take a lot of the techniques we've used and we lean on, and we're going to build upon them, because we're going to do a portion of the calendar in a way we've never done it before.
Will you have a crew in each building? Sorry for interrupting. Are you going to have a crew in each building at all times?
I don't even know I think all those plans are still being formalized.
Yep.
But the fundamental difference you mentioned is, like, we're going to follow a whole division, and we're going to really be able to hone in on the drama of the race to, if I'm not mistaken, right, Emily, there were 3 AFC North teams in the playoffs last year.
Yeah, it's going to be crazy.
It's a great division.
Constant tension, a lot of rivalries, great weather, great football weather at that part of the year. So I think it'll be, again, the building on the foundation of what the brand and the series has been in the past, but kind of redeploying all these techniques to bring fans something new.
And then finally, personally, for both of you, did you enjoy going undercover wearing Giants blue instead of your normal NFL Films black when you're going out to all these events?
As a Giants fan?
Everyone recognizes you guys. They're like, why are you wearing Giants stuff?
Yeah, as a Giants fan, yes. And
you're a Giants fan.
Yeah, for sure. So yes, I kept all the swag we went undercover with, and we'll be wearing it again to support the team this fall.
So let me follow up on me. I'm sorry. I know you got to run. Was it like, as a Giant fan, was this just like the coolest thing for you?
Yeah, it was great. It was, I think, like, sometimes I actually think in kind of all these shows, it's important to try and remember what, like, the fan perspective is. And it was really easy for me on this one, but yeah, you try and put your fans, like, what were I, if I were, a fan of this, of the Bears, what would I want to see? So it made it a lot easier for me, because it was a little more of a natural. But I think that's one of the goals of NFL Films too, is just, you know, a lot of times we're fans and we want to put out there what's entertaining to the fans, which, you know, we all are at football.
Then Paul, I'll let you close with final thoughts. Anything you want to say that maybe we haven't talked about or you want to get out there?
Just thanks for having us on. Appreciate your support, and everybody at the Giants for supporting the project. You know, from Nilay Shah and everybody in marketing, you know, Pat Hanlon and Dion in PR, like everybody was just so helpful with us and supportive of the project. You know, which made it that much more enjoyable. And look, we're thrilled to hear people watching it and responding to it. That's really exciting too. And you know, we hope Giant fans enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed making it.
I could say I really enjoyed it. It was great. I'll speak for the production department. It was great to help you guys out with whatever you guys needed. You got that all important question about the Bachelor from the
Right.
draft picks when they arrived. We're happy to get that for you. Not a problem. I know that made the whole series. But seriously, it was great having you guys here. We appreciate you doing this. Really good information. It was really entertaining. Best of luck to this year, and thanks so much for joining us.
All right,
Thank
John.
you.
Thank
That's
you.
the
Thanks
Giants
for
Huddle
having me.
podcast brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants. For our guests, I'm John Schmeelk. We'll see you next time, everybody.